Okay, welcome to Talks About Evolution. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about Charles Darwin, a couple of other colleagues of his in the terms of evolution go, and how evolution basically works. So we're going to start out with talking about Charles Darwin. He is the father of evolution. And he kind of came up with this idea that some other people also did. And I love this little cartoon because it kind of goes along with everything that we're going to say in here. And that's basically that we are put on this earth to do three things: to eat, survive, and reproduce. So what I mean by that is we're here to eat. We're here to avoid being eaten in some way, shape, or form, or avoid dying, and then we're here to reproduce. Kind of weird to tell college students that, but it's the truth. So that's kind of where we're at as far as evolution goes. Now, Charles Darwin, if I go back to this, he actually, was mapping out the coastline, if I can... Oh, why won't this proceed? There we go. He was mapping out the coastline of South America, and that's when he came upon the Galapagos Islands that you see here. And what ended up happening is he saw the finches, and he noticed that they had different beaks and different adaptations based on what they ate. And so that got him thinking about evolution, and that's kind of how he started his studies on the whole idea of evolution. Okay, if we go back to your notes, one of the words that you're going to hear pretty much all semester is going to be the word adaptations. So an adaptation is going to be something that is going to help an organism eat, avoid being eaten, or reproduce, or all three, or two of the three, or whatever. So adaptations are going to help them to do that, and those are going to be the result of mutations in DNA. So what's going to happen is there are going to be some individuals in a population that have adaptations that are going to help them survive more than others, and the more that they can survive, the more likely it is that they're going to leave offspring, and so on. So we'll get a little bit more into that in a little bit. So going along with that, Darwin came up with these 4 observations of nature. First one being that members of a population are going to vary greatly in their traits. What that means is, if you look at any species, look at us as Homo sapiens, there's a lot of variation, right? We've got height and weight and skin color and eye color and all sorts of different things that we have that cause us to vary. Our traits are going to be inherited from parents to offspring, so that's in our DNA, getting from one individual to another. And all species are capable of producing more offspring than the environment can support. So basically, we can keep reproducing and reproducing, but there's going to be a point where that's not a great idea, and what's going to happen is some of those individuals are going to survive and some won't. So that goes with this last one. Owing to lack of food or resources, many of those will not survive. So then, based on that, he came up with his 2 inferences. The first one is that those who have the traits that give them a higher probability of surviving and reproducing are going to leave more offspring than others. Well, that makes sense, right? If you're around, you have a greater chance of leaving behind offspring. Then, in the second one, it's the unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to accumulation of favorable traits in the population over generations. That's really important. So when people think of evolution, they often think of it as an individual that's evolving. But the way that you need to think about evolution is that it's a population of individuals that's going to evolve over a long period of time. So we'll talk about that more in class, but basically it's not that some chimpanzee was like, hey, did you guys try standing up? It's really nice up here, right? That's not how that works. And we'll talk about that process a little bit more in class. So it's not going to be just cut and dry like that. So really important part of evolution is that you've got variation, right? Because if everybody was the same, then no one's going to have an advantage over anyone else. So what's the point, right? So that's going to be responsible for evolution, is that you're going to have some individuals that are for some reason better equipped to deal with the environment than others. So evolution, the actual word, is talking about change, right? So how something changes over time. You could say my waistline evolved over the holidays, right? Which means it changed. Maybe it got smaller, maybe it got larger, but it changed, right? So evolution in these terms is talking about a population of individuals that have changed over time. So moving on, natural selection is going to be something that you've heard of before most likely, and the little key phrase that always goes with it is survival of the fittest. Now, does that mean the most buff who has the biggest muscles? No, that is not the type of fit we're talking about. The fittest part is talking about how an individual fits to the environment, or how a population can fit to the environment. So whatever group of individuals that has the good genetic makeup that's going to make them the most successful in that environment are going to be the ones that are most likely to pass those genes on. The ones who had the crappy genes that really didn't do anything to help them, or maybe cause them to die, those hopefully are going to not allow them to get to the point where they could reproduce and pass those genes on, so those genes eventually get eliminated from the population. All right. Two important things to remember with natural selection. First one is that although it's going to be an individual's environment that it's going to be relating to, remember, don't think of it as an individual process. It's going to be a group process, so a whole bunch of individuals, and we'll go over some examples of that. The other thing is natural selection can only change heritable traits, right? So things in the DNA, and I shouldn't say change, but you're going to see change expressed in heritable traits. So nothing that you've acquired over a lifetime. Now that kind of has to do with this guy called Lamarck. Lamarck came up with the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And the way he came up with this idea, or the way he liked to explain it, was talking about giraffes. So a lot of people always ask, why do giraffes have such a long neck? And his explanation was, well, they were stretching every day to get to their food. And I think I've got a little slide of this that's, not anything super important. Yeah. So these giraffes are actually extending their necks every day to get to their food, and that's how they got their long necks. Now, that is kind of a crazy concept if you think about it, because that's suggesting that things that you do over your lifetime are actually going to affect your DNA. Now, if that was the case, I could say, all right, I'm going to get pregnant, and I am going to have a baby, and while I'm pregnant, I am going to go to the tanning salon every day, and I am going to work out like crazy every single day. And when I give birth, I'm going to give birth to something that looks like this. Super creepy, first of all. Second of all, that's something I did over my lifetime. That wasn't in my DNA, so there's no way I could actually give birth to this creepy baby, right? So that is obviously not going to be how this whole thing works. Okay, so it kind of also is going to go along with another concept that he had that was called use and disuse. And it's basically, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so that's the way that they came up with to explain, like, you've got fish that are in a cave and they don't have any eyes, so they didn't need their eyes anymore because it was so dark, so they just stopped making them. And that's not exactly how that works. So in class, we're going to talk about some examples of how that actually does work, okay? So I will actually even use the example about the fish and how they don't have eyes and all of that kind of stuff. So in the next video, we'll start to talk about different forms of evolution.